It had begun innocently enough, she assured herself. Sonny Corinthos, the enigmatic and powerful figure who commanded both respect and dread, had been a patient in her care following a minor scuffle that left him with a gash on his arm. The late-night stitching session in the dimly lit clinic room was charged with an unsaid purpose. His dark eyes, which were usually so guarded, softened as he lingered on her, and his deep, gravelly voice contained a warmth that caught her by surprise. She chuckled at his attempt to downplay the damage, and he teased her for her thorough suturing skills. It was a momentary connection, a spark in the sterile confines of the hospital, but it was enough to pique Turner's curiosity. Days passed into weeks and their paths intersected again, not by chance but on purpose. Sonny had a habit of appearing when she least expected it, his presence filling the space like a storm cloud on the horizon. A coffee here, a shared glance there, and Turner was soon dragged into his orbit. She knew who he was, of course. Everybody in Port Charles did. Sonny Corinthos' name was spoken with admiration and caution. He was wedded to the mob, connected to a world of danger and secrecy, but something about him made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. Perhaps it was the way he listened to her, or the way his smile seemed to contain the promise of something more. Whatever it was enough to draw her in and make her forget the limits she had vowed never to cross. The night it happened was a haze of poor decisions and too much wine. Turner was fatigued after her shift at General Hospital, which had stretched into the early hours of the morning. She went to a bar to relax, thinking herself she deserved a break from the never-ending cycle of work and sleep. Sonny was there, like if fate had conspired to bring him into her path. One drink led into two, then three, and before she knew it, they were in his car, driving past the city lights to his penthouse. The air between them crackled with tension, a combination of want and the unspoken realization that this was a mistake. Turner didn't care in that moment. She desired to experience anything other than the monotony of her life and the loneliness that had seeped into her bones. Sonny, with his energy and attractiveness, offered her an escape. The morning following was a painful awakening. Reality hit her like a cold wave, and she snuck out of his apartment before he awoke, her heart hammering with humiliation and guilt. She convinced herself that was a one-time failure of judgment that she could put behind her. However, as is often the case, life had other intentions. Weeks later, the nausea began, gradually becoming more pronounced. She had ignored it for as long as she could, blaming it on stress or a stomach bug, but she knew deep down. The pregnancy test simply verified what her body had been screaming at her for days. She was carrying Sonny's child, the result of a night she couldn't get back. Turner sat in the break room at General Hospital, the test still in her fingers, her mind racing with what it signified. Sonny was a difficult man, caught up in a world she scarcely comprehended. He had a family, including a wife named Carly, whose name held its own weight in Port Charles. Turner had already met Carly at the hospital, a woman full of fire and passionate loyalty who refused to share what she had. Turner's stomach churned just thinking about addressing her and admitting what had occurred. But it was not just Carly. Sonny lived his entire life with danger following him like a shadow. How could she include a child in that? However, the idea of not keeping the baby felt like a betrayal of something she couldn't quite identify. Her shift that day was hazy. She went about her work methodically, checking charts, administering medications, and smiling at people who didn't look at her. Every time the hospital doors opened, she half expected Sonny to stroll in, his presence as imposing as ever. She wasn't sure whether she wanted to see him or dreaded it. Half of her wanted to tell him, to lay it all out there and see what he'd say, but another half shouted at her to keep it quiet, to protect herself and the life developing inside her from the insanity that was Sonny Corinthos. The next days were equally difficult. Turner considered her alternatives, each one more terrifying than the previous. She could tell Sonny, risking impending both his and her lives. She could keep it to herself and raise the child on her own, but the prospect of single motherhood, especially in a town like Port Charles where secrets tend to surface, was overwhelming. She could go and start over somewhere fresh, but the thought of giving up the life she'd established, the work she loved, tore at her. Every decision felt like a trap, and the weight of everything pressed down on her until she could barely breathe. She told no one, not even her best friend at the hospital, Elizabeth, who had a gift for seeing through people's facades. Turner was unprepared for the inquiries, criticism, and sympathy. She carried the secret like a bruise, hidden but sore, and it flared up whenever she saw herself in the mirror or felt nausea. The hospital, which had previously been her haven, suddenly felt like a stage where she was performing a part, pretending everything was okay while her world shifted beneath her. Sonny, for his part, appeared oblivious to the tempest brewing in her life. He texted her a few days after their night out, casual and charming, asking whether she was all right. She responded with a lame excuse about being busy, wanting to keep him at arm's length. But Port Charles was small, and Sonny was not the type of man you could avoid indefinitely. When they finally met again, it was outside the hospital, with the late afternoon sun creating long shadows across the street. He was resting against his car, his outfit as perfect as ever, but his face softened when he spotted her. "Turner," he whispered, his voice evoking the same warmth that had previously undone her. "You've been dodging me." She forced a smile, her hand reflexively reaching to her stomach before she stopped herself. "Just been busy," she explained, her voice tighter than she intended. He observed her, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if he could feel the weight she was bearing. "Are you sure? You don't look like yourself." His concern was almost overwhelming. She wanted to tell him to get the words out and be done with it, but the fear of what might happen next stopped her. Instead, she shrugged, said something about a long shift, and made an excuse to go. Sonny watched her leave, his expression impassive, but she felt his gaze on her back long after she had turned the corner. Turner sat on her couch, the pregnancy test hidden away in a drawer she hadn't seen since the first day. She attempted to envisage a future in which this wasn't a mistake, where she could be a mother and Sonny could be something other than who he was. But the photographs wouldn't appear. All she could see was the world she had wandered into, one in which every decision appeared to lead to heartache. She remembered her own mother, who had raised her alone, the sacrifices engraved in every line on her face. Turner had swore she would never tread that path, but here she was staring it down. The next day at the hospital, she overheard two nurses discussing Sonny and Carly, their voices low but piercing with gossip. "Heard they're fighting again," one said. "She won't let him go though." Turner's heart fell. She didn't want to start a war, nor did she want to be the other lady in an already written story. However, the baby altered everything. It wasn't only about her anymore. She began to notice the simple things, how her scrubs felt tighter, how certain odors at the hospital made her stomach churn. She was hyper-aware of her body now, each change a reminder of the life she couldn't escape. She began secretly exploring her alternatives, reading about prenatal care, adoption, and even abortion, though the last caused her chest to ache in ways she couldn't articulate. She wasn't ready to make a decision just yet, but the clock was ticking, and she knew she couldn't hide indefinitely. One night, unable to sleep, she drove to the pier, where she had gone after her first major dispute with her ex years before. The ocean was quiet, and the lights of Port Charles reflected on its surface like dispersed stars. She sat on a seat with her hands around her knees, allowing herself to cry for the first time since seeing those two pink lines. The tears flowed in waves for the mistake she'd made, for the child she wasn't sure she could keep, and for the life she'd imagined she'd have. She hadn't heard the footsteps behind her until it was too late. "Turner." Sonny's voice broke the silence and she froze, wiping her face with the back of her palm. He stood a few steps away, hands in his pockets, and his look was a mix of concern and uncertainty. "What is going on?" She wanted to lie, push him off again, but something in his voice, possibly the same thing that drew her to him in the first place, made her stop. "I'm pregnant," she said, the words rushing out before she could stop them. They hung in the air, heavy and irreversible, and neither of them said anything. Sonny's expression was unreadable, and his jaw tightened as he processed her remarks. "Is it?" He started, but he didn't have to complete. She nodded and the stillness lingered, the weight of her confession settling between them like fog. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to do." He took a step closer, his gaze fixed on hers. "You don't have to do this alone," he added, but even as he spoke, she could see the struggle in him, the pull of his other life, which she'd never truly be a part of. The talk that ensued was raw and messy, with questions neither of them could fully address. Sonny never made promises he couldn't keep, and Turner never asked for them. They talked about the baby, what it meant for both of them, and the tough decisions ahead. He offered to help and be present, but she could hear the hesitation in his voice, the shadow of his other responsibilities. She wasn't sure she could or wanted to trust him. When she left the pier that night, she felt no closer to making a decision, but something had changed. The secret was out, shared between them, and while it didn't ease her load, it did make her feel less like she was carrying it alone. The days that followed were a flurry of appointments and peaceful periods of reflection. She saw a doctor at General Hospital, one she trusted to maintain her confidence, and began the slow process of figuring out what was going on with her body. She reflected on her future, the type of mother she may be, and the kind of life she could provide for this child. Sonny reached out again, more cautiously this time, and they met for coffee at a little cafe on the outskirts of town, away from prying eyes. He was open about his life, the hazards and challenges, but he also spoke about the child with reverence, which astonished her. He didn't force her to make a decision or try to control the situation, which she appreciated. But the truth of who he was loomed huge, and she realized any future with him would be filled with difficulties. Turner gradually began to lean toward keeping the baby, though the decision was difficult. She began to see a life in which she might be a mother and find a way to combine her profession and her child, even if it meant going it alone. She began to see the pregnancy not as a mistake, but as a watershed moment, an opportunity to remake her life on her terms. She had no idea what role Sonny would play, or if he would play one at all, but she was coming to realize that her strength was not dependent on him. The hospital remained her anchor, a place where she could immerse herself in the rhythm of rescuing lives while her own was in transition. She began to open up to Elizabeth, giving bits and pieces of her experience, and found solace in her friend's quiet support. Port Charles, with all of its drama and mysteries, remained her home, and she was unwilling to leave. However, the shadow of Carly lingered, and Turner knew it was just a matter of time before the truth was revealed. She'd seen enough of Port Charles to know that secrets don't stay hidden forever, and when this one came to light, it would send shockwaves across the community. She wasn't foolish enough to believe she could avoid the consequences, but for the first time she felt prepared to confront them. The baby growing inside her reminded her that she was stronger than she had realized, and that she could deal with whatever came next. So as the days evolved into weeks, Turner took one step at a time, bearing the weight of her decisions and the prospect of something new. The future was uncertain, but she could mold it, and that was sufficient for the time being. According to General Hospital spoilers, Sonny Corinthos' blackmail retaliation is about to occur. Jen Sidwell's bribe judge leverage could seal this villain's doom. So let's talk about the dangerous drama that's going to unfold. Marco Rios observed Willow Tate slapping Lucas Jones at GH and saw firsthand how much Willow is unraveling. That's why Marco dashed to Sidwell with an urgent warning. Marco made it plain that if Sidwell intended to proceed with his Sonny blackmail scheme, he had to do so before it was too late. If Willow deviates too far from the path, no judge will be able to return her children. Sidwell may lose his Sonny influence if Michael's custody predicament becomes permanent. Sidwell values Marco's opinion and may decide that pulling the trigger is the best decision. Although Sidwell was waiting for the proper moment to strike, Marco just gave him an incentive to move quickly. In fact, Sidwell's perfect moment may be approaching quickly. Perhaps it will occur after Michael Corinthos decks DRUNKEN at the Metro Court and shows signs of unraveling as well. Whatever the case, it will be intriguing to see how Sidwell surprises Sonny. Perhaps Sidwell will bring Sonny to a meeting and assure him it will be worth his time. Sonny may balk at first, but Sidwell may make some cryptic remarks and suggest about Michael's full-time daddy status based on Sonny's next step. When Sonny finally submits and meets with Sidwell, he may become outraged after learning about Sidwell's plan. Sidwell may bring up the judge's bribery and discuss how Sonny will be the #1 suspect if the shady wired money news leaks. Michael may lose custody of Wiley Corinthos and Amelia Corinthos, which could ruin his relationship with Sonny if he believes his father bribed the judge and was caught. That's the story Sidwell will tell Sonny as he blackmails him into submission. Sonny isn't the type of guy who likes to follow instructions from someone like Sidwell, but he may be forced to do so, at least for the time being. However, Sonny might warn that he will never forget this. It's easy to see Sonny issuing his own threat and arguing that Sidwell will eventually regret pushing him into this corner. Sidwell may be sealing his own fate by going so low against Sonny. It could cross a deadly line and pave the way for Sidwell's final demise at the hands of Sonny, even if it doesn't happen until much later. According to General Hospital spoilers, Sonny will not let Sidwell get away with his antics indefinitely, so stay tuned for updates on all of the shocking news coming up. The game began gently, with an offhand quip made during a discussion that Sonny mistook for a business meeting. Sidwell made a hushed remark about how custody battles never seemed to go against Sonny, almost as if the decisions were predetermined. Sonny stiffened at the inference, but he dismissed it with his usual calm demeanor. He'd dealt with insinuations before. But when Sidwell followed up with details, exact dates, precise rulings, a name Sonny had worked so hard to forget, he realized he was dealing with something far more hazardous. Sidwell was not guessing. He knew. The judge had been purchased, the evidence pointed to Sonny's influence, and Sidwell had the papers and witnesses to back it up. For Sonny, the walls started to shut in. His empire was built on terror and respect, but his personal life was far more vulnerable. Custody disputes, particularly those involving his children, were the one area in which he fought tooth and nail, trying to preserve the familial links that defined him more than any region in Port Charles. If Sidwell went public, everything Sonny had accomplished with his children would be brought into doubt. Every choice in his favor would appear contaminated, the result of corruption rather than parental affection. Michael, Christina, Avery, and Donna could all be used as pawns if the courts reopened. The prospect of losing them cut worse than any bullet ever could. Sidwell made it obvious that Sonny had to comply with his demands or risk being exposed. There was no room for Sonny to bargain or use his power. Sidwell was not intimidated by Sonny's reputation. If anything, he appeared empowered by it, as if taking down the mob boss gave him a delight. Sonny attempted to keep a poker face, but his mind was racing. He had to determine how far Sidwell was ready to go, what he desired, and whether there was any chance to turn the situation around before it became completely out of his hands. The demands were not directly related to money. Sidwell desired access to Sonny's network, influence, and the kind of pull that money could not buy. He wanted Sonny to unlock doors that had previously been closed to him, so legitimizing his dealings through Sonny's contacts. It was a slow poison, the type of arrangement that would gradually bind Sonny's hands until Sidwell had woven himself so completely into his life that there was no way out. For someone like Sonny, who thrived on power, the prospect of becoming another man's puppet was unthinkable. However, the alternative meant facing exposure, disgrace, and the potential of losing his children forever. When the home was silent at night and the weight of the day pressed down on him, Sonny considered what this could mean for his family. He pictured Michael's expression of betrayal if he discovered his father had arranged custody disputes. He imagined Carly using the revelation as ammunition to keep the children away from him indefinitely. He worried Christina's disapproval, the one daughter he'd always struggled to connect with yet dearly wanted to keep safe. Most of all, he was troubled by the prospect of Donna and Avery being separated due to legal technicalities. Sidwell's warning was more than just a power play. It was a dagger aiming directly at Sonny's heart. Sonny became increasingly aware that Sidwell was underestimating him. Yes, the individual possessed information. Yes, he had leverage. But Sonny hadn't lasted this long by allowing others to dictate his actions. He started quietly reaching out and tugging cords in the background. He needed to know how reliable Sidwell's evidence was, and whether the bribe judge could be switched, silenced, or dismissed. He investigated whether Sidwell had allies or if this was a solo performance. Most critically, he wondered if he could discover Sidwell's own vulnerabilities. Everyone had them, and Sonny had built a profession out of identifying pressure spots. Still, he couldn't shake the suspicion that Sidwell had planned for this very scenario. What if the man kept backups concealed in areas Sonny couldn't reach? What if his exposure was already in motion, just waiting for a trigger? It was a hazardous game of chess, and Sonny knew he couldn't make one false move. However, the more Sidwell kept this secret, the more he felt suffocated. The walls of Port Charles appeared to close in. Every glance, every whispered conversation felt as if it were about him. The reactions of those closest to him exacerbated the situation. Jason saw Sonny's lack of focus almost immediately. Jason pressed Sonny about his old instincts not firing as clearly, but he couldn't bring himself to accept the truth. Confiding in Jason meant putting another person in the sights of Sidwell's strategy, which Sonny couldn't risk. Carly, as keen as ever, saw his distancing and her suspicions grew. The more he attempted to disguise the pressure, the more fractures appeared in his armor, making it difficult to maintain the illusion of control. Sidwell, meanwhile, seems to love playing with Sonny, dropping subtle reminders of his dominance. A text message with the date and ruling attached. A casual remark to the judge in question. A subtle threat camouflaged as light chat. Each interaction was a tightening noose, bringing Sonny closer to the edge. And Sonny despised himself for being reactive rather than proactive, for allowing someone else to set the pace. The real test would come when Sidwell's demands grew, forcing Sonny into a position where denial was no longer an option. Sonny knew it was coming. He could feel it. And when it arrived, he'd have to make the most difficult decision of his life. Hand Sidwell the keys to his company or risk losing the family he'd given everything to preserve. In those sleepless nights, pacing his dimly lit kitchen or peering out at the black waters, Sonny wondered whether he was finally paying the price for all the shortcuts he had taken. Perhaps this was karma circling back, reminding him that power gained via corruption could always be taken away in the same manner. Or just maybe this was another test of his fortitude, another storm to weather. He wasn't sure which way the balances would tip, but one thing was certain. Sidwell had drawn blood, and Sonny Corinthos wasn't the type of guy to leave that unanswered.